Okie dokie. Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Wong. It's the 23rd of July, and this is our wellness webinar for Thriving Thursdays. Today, we have this really special guest, Jared Urchek, who's a licensed acupuncturist, herbalist, and mycologist. That means he's an expert in mushrooms, and we are going to talk today and really look forward to listening to learning from Jared about medicinal mushrooms for the immune system. It's great to see you all here, and again, thank you for taking your valuable time at lunch to come here and listen to these wellness webinars, and really had a good time since we started doing this a couple months ago. So I think what I'll do, because we have a lot of good information here, is I'll start with our usual CIH and COVID updates. And new cases of COVID are starting to go back up in Maryland. So one of the questions is, are we open too soon? Are we doing, what can we do differently to prevent that? And we know that one of the big things with COVID, and this is something that people don't always focus on as much, is how do we boost our own immune systems internally so that whatever comes about, we can deal with it. Our immune system can deal with it. So there are different components of immunity. So it's not just about vaccines. Vaccines are going to stimulate B cells to produce circulating antibodies, which is how vaccines work. But other components of the immune system, including natural killer cell activity, B cell memory activity, which produces antibodies if on re-exposure, as well as T cell activity and regulation, are all really important, and even probably more important than the circulating antibodies. So another thing is that long-term effects of COVID are only starting to be understood, that people can actually start having chronic inflammatory response syndrome. So it is about also reducing and controlling inflammation. Another thing that, I think we want to be sure to say, we're not anti-vaccine here, but, we are going to be looking at things critically, and we're going to look at the Oxford and NIH vaccines that are coming out in these phase 3 clinical trials, and what are the safety and side effects of these. And one of the trials so far, 70% of the people had fever and headache with a vaccine, which is going to be a hard sell for public that already has a high degree of mistrust towards vaccines. So we're going to be really following this and giving you the best information on this. There's a question about duration of antibody response as well, that multiple doses are likely required for a vaccine, and that antibodies might only last for 2 or 3 months based on studies in both China and the United Kingdom. So as we get into the fall, coming up very soon actually, even though summer seems like it's been passing by pretty quickly, we have to also be concerned about the interaction between COVID-19 and influenza virus, which we know is always coming up in the fall. And so we are going to be carrying a flu vaccine this year for the second year due to patient demand. It will be available in about a month here. It is different from most vaccines in that it is egg-free, preservative-free, and mercury-free, but it is still a vaccine, and we do want to also mitigate any side effects from that. So we've developed an integrated vaccine protocol. You do want to optimize sleep, because a good night's sleep before a vaccine, at least getting 6 hours of sleep a night, does increase antibody response. That makes the vaccine more effective. You also want to optimize the gut microbiome with different foods, probiotics, vitamin D, glutamine, and omega-3 fatty acids. And you also want to support immune system activity with mushrooms, which we'll talk about today with Jared, mushroom tea, micronutrients, including IV Immunoboost, which is the IV cocktail that we have here that we can do between 3 days before and also 3 days after flu vaccine to help mitigate some of those side effects. So flu vaccine is only one of multiple ways to activate the immune system. And this is a great article from orthomolecular.org, which is using super therapeutic doses of vitamins to help to boost the immune system. Specifically, there's research on vitamin C, vitamin D, and zinc, as well as some other treatments that are considered more natural, as well as some drugs as well to help with COVID. So there's some really good things in that article. If you want to check that out, there's a link there. There's some other research on optimizing vitamin D, avoiding sugar and processed foods, optimizing gut health, reducing screen time for less than 2 hours a day, which I think is really important if we can all do that. And then some herbal considerations here, including mushrooms, which we'll talk about today. Please discuss with your practitioner or practitioners if you have questions about those. And then finally, Katie and I are doing a healthy gut, healthy immune system module, a virtual group visit that's built to insurance, talking about what the optimal gut health should look like, and what are the components to optimize that, to decrease gut inflammation, to help balance the microbiome. We're going to do that on Tuesday, July 28th at 4 p.m. So please email Wendell, who I believe is here today. So hello, Wendell. And and charm to express interest in the gut class if you're a patient here. So Jared is on, and we're really excited to have Jared here to talk about medicinal mushrooms for immune health. So thank you so much, Jared.
All right, thank you so much. Yeah, Dr. Wong and the CIH staff, this is really great to be able to have a relationship and a connection here. And I'm always happy to share information about medicinal mushrooms, which is a really favorite topic of mine. Let me see if I can go ahead and share my screen. We can jump on here. I have a lot of information in the slides in the beginning here just about mushrooms in general and what they are, because I think a lot of people still have some confusion or still don't have a great sense of what mushrooms are and the role they play in the world. So I'll just kind of cruise through that really quickly so we can get to the medicinal part. But I always like to add this information in because it is, to me, it's really worth understanding a little bit of the background so that we understand why medicinal mushrooms are so beneficial for us. And just to begin here, I'll mention about myself. So I'm an acupuncturist, like Dr. Wong said, and I also practice zero balancing and herbalism, and I focus on mushrooms in particular, and doing plant ID and mushroom walks and various classes on the weekends for folks. And when the pandemic isn't on, we have yoga and Tai Chi and all kinds of other good stuff here at my studio in College Park. And for the mushrooms, yeah, the kingdom of fungi is just this huge world. There's an estimated 1.5 to 5 million species in the kingdom, which is way, way more than plants. And to date, we've only identified actually about 140,000 of those. So the amount of knowledge that we have about fungi is really quite small. And of those 140,000, only 10,000 are mushrooms, or fungi that put out this fruiting body into the world. And the rest are single-celled yeast, bread molds, pin molds, things like that attack your fruit on the kitchen counter and live their whole life inside of soil. So that all said, humans, we only really regularly use or know how to cultivate about 100. And again, you can just see how dramatic our lack of understanding about this kingdom as a whole is. And that being said, what we do know is really pretty remarkable. I'll mention briefly that it wasn't just until the late 60s that we even considered fungi a separate kingdom. And in 1987, a guy suggested that actually Animalia, animals the kingdom we're a part of, and the kingdom's fungi are so closely related that we actually form a meta-kingdom together called Episthokanta, kind of a cool Greek name there. And this has been confirmed by genetic studies and all that. And the reason that I mention this is because this close relationship, fungi fight off the same pathogens in the environment that we do. So when we get attacked by bacteria, by viruses, by pathogenic fungi in the world have to fight those same pathogens off. And as we'll get into the life cycle of fungi here, they're always in contact with the rotting world, fungi are. So they have to be basically little pharmaceutical factories to be able to generate all these compounds that fight off these bacteria, that fight off fungi and viruses in the environment. Briefly speaking, we'll touch on this a little bit later in terms of what kind of mushroom supplements you can get a hold of these days, and it's really quite varied. And there are really 3 parts to the mushroom life cycle, and 3 different types of supplements that we can find, and that's supplements based on the cap of the mushroom, which is the actual fruiting body, supplements based on the spores of the mushrooms, which are the seeds, tiny microscopic little things that are released by the millions, sometimes trillions, and the mycelium, which is this very cottony web-like structure that is the roots of the mushroom. And so those are the 3 major parts of the fungi that we'll see in various types of medicinal supplements. Here's just a little bit of a closer example of the spores that germinates into the mycelium, and this kind of cottony spider web-like stuff that the mycelium is, which then forms the mushrooms. Another good shot of some mycelium there. You can see this kind of odd branched out network that it has. It's really quite beautiful. Couple bits of information here. There's really just four types of fungi and how they exist in nature. They either eat dead things, they kill off living things, they live with the roots of other living organisms, which is a whole nother talk we could get into, or as endophytes, they live inside of other creatures. So there's really this quite diverse way that fungi are existing around us and inside of us that we can take advantage of.
Hey Jared, sorry to interrupt. Would you mind scooting a little bit closer? The sound's just a little bit low.
Yeah, sure. How is that?
I think that is better.
Okay, great.
Maybe just like speaking a little bit louder.
Yeah, perfect.
Thank you.
So as I mentioned, fungi are the original big pharma here. They're little pharmaceutical factories, and they really have to be able to live in these complex rotting environments that are filled with other fungi, filled with other bacteria, filled with other viruses. And again, because of our close relationship, we can ingest these chemicals and benefit from them. And in fact, our bodies are naturally adapted to use these chemicals really efficiently. We've been eating fungi for hundreds of thousands of years as Homo sapiens and millions of years before that as our ancestors. We've had a long time to develop our biology to create specialized receptors in our digestive system that will take these compounds from fungi and really quickly distribute them to all of the tissues of the body. One study of mice showed that this compound PSK, which is protein-bound polysaccharide, a really heavyweight sugar, which is a medicinal compound from turkey tail mushrooms. They did a study with mice that had cancer, or I guess we should say more specifically, mice that they gave cancer, and then gave them turkey tail, this PSK compound, and found that within 24 hours of ingestion, this medicinal compound was distributed through the bones, the salivary glands, the brain, the liver, the spleen, the pancreas, and tumoral tissue of the mouse subjects. So you can see that as animals, and in particular as humans, we have this really specialized way of utilizing fungal medicine. So yeah, let's talk about medicinal mushrooms a little more clearly here. We've had thousands and thousands of years of recorded history with medicinal mushrooms from both Eastern culture and Western culture. And that over there on the left is wood ear, which is probably the first mushrooms humans ever grew, and is a good blood thinner as well as great support for cancer and various other types of protection from radioactive energy as well. And over there on the right is agarikon, Fomitopsis officinalis, which was written about in the 1st century by Greek culture. And a really interesting expression or example of medicinal mushrooms being used is Otzi the Iceman, who was found estimated to be about 5,000 years old. He was found with 2 types of medicinal mushrooms on him. One was a tinder conch, which can be used to start fires, but is also used for moxibustion, which we use in Chinese medicine. We'll put little bits of plant material on acupuncture points and burn them. And that tinder conch can actually be used as a moxa. And oddly enough, he was actually found with all kinds of acupuncture points tattooed on his body that were accurate acupuncture points for the conditions that the autopsy of his body showed that he had, including back pain and arthritic knees and all this other stuff. He was also found with chunks of birch polypore, which can be used as a knife sharpener and as a leather strop, but also is active against the exact type of intestinal pinworms that Otzi had. So, this is 5,000 years ago that this ancestor was walking around with medicinal mushrooms that were specific for the conditions that he had. It's really quite interesting to see how our herbal traditions and our medicinal traditions are really quite deep, deeper than recorded history, of course. In terms of modern usage of medicinals, there's really not enough research done on these amazing herbs. Most of the studies that have been done have come from Asia, And they haven't had a lot of double-blind placebo studies. So Western science tends to disregard them, although there's quite a wealth of knowledge in those studies and examples in those studies. A lot of the other studies that are shown are either in vitro, as in the petri dish, or animal studies using mice or other animals. So while those are really interesting to give us a sense of what these medicinal mushrooms are doing, it's not exactly the same as feeding them to humans and seeing what the action is in human bodies. And there have been a couple of great human trials, or a lot of great human trials at this point, and we'll follow up with those at the end of this presentation to see which human trials have happened and what they've shown. Won't dip too much into this, but essentially the medicine that comes from fungi is often tonic and adaptogenic. There are certain types of herbs like echinacea, for instance, which has directive effects. You know, it stimulates the immune system in a very direct way. If you take a lot of echinacea, it's going to really strongly stimulate your immune system. And if you take it for a long time, it's going to do that for a long time. So you can actually burn out your immune system with herbs like echinacea and other directive effect ones. Other herbs are considered to be tonic, which is more considered like food for the body. There's not a way to really overdo a lot of the tonic and adaptogenic herbs, as it's not as easy to overdo them as it is directed because they're more nourishing and they're more supportive of the whole system. In particular, adaptogens, there are 3 general rules for adaptogens. They should cause no harm and place no additional stress on the body. They should help the body adapt to all the varied types of environmental and psychological stress. And they should have a non-specific action supporting all of the major systems of the body, which, as we'll look through these medicinal mushrooms in the coming slides, that's really what medicinal mushrooms do, is they have this non-specific supportive action on all of the tissues of the body for the most part, and they have this great way of helping us adapt to the very varied levels of stress that we all experience on a day-to-day basis. So let's talk about some of these medicinal mushrooms in particular. There's going to be a bunch of information coming up, and I think you all have access to these slides afterwards. So again, I'll just sort of cruise through here and highlight some of the things that I find to be really interesting. And please let me know if there's any questions. I don't know that I actually see questions coming up yet. So let's jump in here with reishi. Reishi, also known as the mushroom of immortality or the mushroom of 10,000 years, is considered to be a very potent mushroom by the Chinese herbalists in particular. And there's a lot of different species of this mushroom, but they all have a very similar function. In general, it's adaptogenic again, so it's going to be very supportive on all levels. It's hepatoprotective, meaning it helps the liver, antihistamine, anti-inflammatory, all these other really great functions. In particular, it's immune enhancing, anti-tumoral, nerve tonic, and a stress reducer. Anti-allergy is one of the main ways that it's been used. You know, for people who have hay fever, for people who have food allergies, mold sensitivities, this is a really great herb to take because it reduces histamine levels and it helps the liver process toxins and difficult things in the environment. So it really helps soothe the system in a really great way. Anti-cholesterol, there's a lot of really good research about that, as well as its interaction with diabetes. And, you know, especially in COVID times where diabetes and heart disease are such important comorbidities or factors that make COVID worse, it's really worth looking into support for these issues. So in this reishi in particular, there's studies that indicate it helps release insulin and also that it helps protect the islet cells of the pancreas from oxidative damage. So it helps to protect the insulin function and the insulin release that we have. Really great as a lung tonic, especially those with asthma, also for high altitude sickness, really good for the nerves. The radioprotective quality is interesting. We see this with a lot of medicinal mushrooms, especially mushrooms that have a high melanin content. So the darker mushrooms like reishi, shiitake, chaga, wood ear, like I mentioned before, you know, all of these darker mushrooms, they seem to have this way of helping protect the body against ionizing radiation. And there are studies that show that taking the medicinal mushrooms before you get exposed to radiation is really beneficial. And also taking the medicinal mushroom supplement after being exposed is helpful in helping the body heal from the damage that has occurred from that radioactivity. Antihypertensive, again, for the coronary system, and it's anti-inflammatory as well. Again, speaking about COVID with the inflammation that can come in from the COVID, there are really interesting studies that show that its effects have been comparable with the prednisone and hydrocortisone with little to no side effects. And this is really interesting because anti-inflammatories, you know, it has this immune stimulating function as well as the anti-inflammatory function. Immune theory, as I understand it, used to hold that essentially you have an immune response because you have inflammation. And so those two were directly related. Yet here is an herb that is anti-inflammatory in a really powerful way, but is also supportive for the immune system. And so it has this kind of bidirectional action as an herb, which is really, really interesting. And again, points to that adaptogenic quality of the mushroom. Also antioxidant, especially like we had said with this, with insulin aspect. And let's click on that again. There we go. And in terms of the immune system, it's also really helpful with anti-tumoral effects. There are a lot of great studies that show that reishi prevents tumoral angiogenesis, which is when a tumor sort of creates vascularization around itself. It hijacks our body to sort of steal our blood resources, right? And reishi has this anti-angiogenetic effect where it helps prevent that from happening. Also, as Dr. Wong was talking about before with the immune system, reishi is an herb that incites macrophages, natural killer cells, T cells, as well as tumor necrosis factors to directly attack cancerous cells as well as other pathogens in the body. It assists a type of checkpoint in the cells that help to inspect mutated cells. So it really helps our body to be able to flag cells that are not ours and flag cells that are mutated. And it's really powerful for just helping the immune system overall. You know, somebody, generally when people ask what's the best simple thing they can do for their immune system, the best simple thing that I recommend is to take a reishi supplement daily. And you know, you're going to be having this great wash of all these chemicals through your immune system, and it's really supportive in so many different ways. And again, it's a tonic adaptogenic herb, so you can't really overdo reishi. Some people may be sensitive to it on an individual level, but that's pretty rare. And generally speaking, it's an extremely safe herb to take. And also for the immune system, it's known to be antiviral, especially against influenza type A and herpes simplex. Let's see if there was any, I'm seeing the chat pop up here. Yeah, from Christine, the best way to take reishi. That's a great question. And we'll talk about that a little bit in the coming slides. But one of the best ways to take reishi is any way you can take it, is my short answer. You know, just getting the herb in is going to be great for your immune system and for your body in general. And a lot of times you'll be able to find capsules of the mycelium, the roots of reishi, and those are really good supplements because they're easy. You know, it's easy to just take a couple of capsules a day of this herb. You know, if you're going to ask me what I think is actually the best way to take this, then I'm going to say it's going to be the traditional way that this herb was taken, which was as a broth and as a tea. So, you know, this is a very dense mushroom. If it dries out, it's almost got the consistency of wood. So it's very dense, very hard. And that means that you really need to simmer this herb for, you know, at least a half an hour to 45 minutes. I generally use a tablespoon of reishi per quart of water and simmer it for a good long time. And that heat really opens up these complex proteins and these complex molecules to be able to be released into the water. So yeah, in terms of what's the best way to take reishi, and then from Anne, the best form, which form is the best? I say the whole cap, the fruiting body itself is the best way to take this mushroom. Ideally in a tea that's been extracted for a long time. I also produce tinctures that are extracted from water in that more in-depth way, and then also alcohol extracted. So you have a preserved tincture, and that's a really great way to take it because then you get the alcohol-soluble chemicals as well as the water-soluble chemicals in that mushroom. But again, the best way to take it is going to be the way that you will actually take it daily, and that's really what we want, is for people to take it daily. Let's talk about shiitake. That's a really popular mushroom. It's really, I think, the second most cultivated mushroom in the world. Really delicious, really, really great for the immune system. You'll see a lot of similarities between shiitake and reishi and all these other herbs, a lot of these other mushrooms, because they have a similar effect in the body, although, of course, they each have a different personality. Again, some people may experience an allergy to shiitake, and it may thin blood in people who are already hemophiliac patients or who already have thin blood, but there's no evidence of toxicity and generally extremely safe. It's a food, you just eat it daily. Again, it's very antimicrobial, antiviral, antitumoral in many of the same ways. Some studies showed tumor inhibition rates on certain cancers in vitro between 40 and 73%. So it's really just can have some remarkable numbers. Antiviral, especially against the stomach virus in mice. And here's some evidence too about boosted resistance against respiratory viruses in mouse studies. And in general, significant protection from viral infection. So taking this as a daily sort of supplement to prevent ourselves from being susceptible to these viruses is a really important way to take the mushroom. It's much better to prevent something before it happens rather than to try and treat something afterwards. So shiitake is one of the things you can do on a day-to-day basis, just having it in your stir fries, having it in your dinner. Having a serving of shiitake a day is going to be a great way to keep your immune system boosted. Also, the mycelial compound was found to block herpes simplex release in animals. And I think that was just HSV1 and not 2, which is interesting to some people. Cardiovascularly also has a lot of interaction with cholesterol and lipids, as well as hypertension. So really good stuff there. Again, really good for the liver, really helpful for just general liver protective effects, as well as some evidence that it interacts beneficially with patients with liver cancer, improving liver function and helping to produce antibodies to hepatitis B. Again, great for the immune system. It enhances, this herb in particular, enhances immune functions in the host, in the person taking it, rather than having compounds that directly affect the tumors themselves, or the tumor cells themselves. So it raises the function of our T cells in the body. Lentinin, which is a compound in shiitake, is used for patients during chemotherapy, used as an adjunct treatment to help boost the immune system. That's one thing you see in the studies really again and again, is mushrooms being used as adjunct therapies while people are on radiation and chemo for cancer, because it helps protect and boost the immune system in a really gentle way. And again, it also helps protect our body and protect the liver and protect us from radioactive damage as well. So it's really just an excellent supportive herb for people that are working with cancer. And of course, you need to work with your doctor on that, or speak with your health professional about that. But the studies are really clear that this is a great support for folks in that situation. Activates natural killer cells and induces host defense against a whole load of different bacteria, viruses, and parasites. Also, an interesting thing about shiitake and a lot of these other mushrooms is when you dry them in the sunlight, the mushrooms actually generate vitamin D. Similar to us, when we go into the sunlight, we produce vitamin D3. Mushrooms are very similar to us again, and when they are in the sunlight, when they go for a walk in the sunshine, they actually produce vitamin D2. And it's at quite high rates. Shiitakes will produce 800 to 4,000 or so IU of vitamin D2 per 100 grams when just exposed to 3 hours of sunlight. After 12 hours of sunlight, that shoots up to 46,000 IU, which is a medical dose of vitamin D. If you're going to get a vitamin D supplement at that very high level, 50,000 IU is a typical very high dose. So it's kind of remarkable how much shiitake can produce. And this is both when it's fresh and dry. So when you get mushrooms from the store, you can just set them on your windowsill. You can set them outside on a patio table and just let them soak in the sunlight for a few hours. And that vitamin D will actually stay in the tissue of that mushroom for many months. So it can be really great to get a bunch of shiitake dried out on your patio table and soaking in that vitamin D. And then you have vitamin D boosted shiitake that you can use as food all winter long and get your vitamin D supplement that way. Cordyceps, this is a really interesting herb. Let's see what time we're at, just so I don't go over, because I really want to focus too at the end on some of the clinical trials that have happened, that we can really see how these mushrooms affect people on a human level, on a personal level. Cordyceps is a parasitic fungus that attacks insects. And while that may be a turnoff to some people, most of what's produced these days is produced in labs without being grown on insects. So the cordyceps you buy in the store is not going to contain any caterpillars. There we go. Used as a lung tonic in particular, this is one of the best herbs to use that I recommend to clients who have asthma, who have lung issues, who have any kind of chronic lung thing going on. This is such a good herb for the lungs. It was discovered, the story goes, by observant yak farmers who were watching their herds at high altitude, and they noticed that some of the yaks, they would run up the mountain faster, they would have more energy, and they would have more children, right? Or they would have more yak babies. And so the yak farmers were thinking like, that looks pretty good. I want some of what they're having. So they started to harvest this for themselves. Has a medicinal effect similar to ginseng, and it's really great for strengthening and rebuilding after an exhausting or a long-term illness. So if somebody gets knocked down with a really difficult flu, if they have COVID and they've been recovering and they still are feeling really, really rough and really weak, this would be a great herb to go to. Traditionally, it was stuffed into the stomach of a duck and roasted over a fire. And so there may be some interesting compounds that are fat soluble with that you may want to pay attention to. And in general, you don't want to use this when you have a fever. So that's the only contraindication. Some people say to take vitamin C with it while you are taking cordyceps as well. Really helpful. Oh, let's see if that was a question coming through. Oh, do the mushrooms have to be eaten raw, backing up to the vitamin D? No, you can cook them. The vitamin D is stable, so you don't have to eat them raw. And in general, I don't recommend eating mushrooms raw because the heat breaks them down and makes them more bioavailable. So it's easier to digest the mushroom if you cook them. And also, certain mushrooms do contain proteins or other chemicals that need heat to break them down. In particular, button mushrooms and morel mushrooms. If you do any wild mushroom harvesting, morels really need to be cooked because they contain a type of hydrazine that can be really difficult to ingest. So we want to cook those. Oh, and a brand of supplements or mushroom powders that I trust. That's a good question. There's a lot of really good companies out there. In general, Paul Stamets' company, which is Host Defense, has a really great line of supplements. And New Chapter also has some really good products as well, and they use a fermented type of extracted mycelium. So I think that they have a process to make that medicine a little bit more bioavailable. So New Chapter is also a good brand that I recommend. But cordyceps, yeah, really great for diabetic considerations as well. Can lower plasma glucose via stimulation of insulin. And it's also antioxidant. Really helpful for people who have aged and have a antioxidant level that is lower than they could. Superoxide dismutase, which is antioxidant levels in elder patients age 60 to 84, after taking cordyceps showed levels usually associated with 17 to 21-year-olds. So really powerful in this ability for this mushroom to produce antioxidants. Amazing for asthma. I know a lot of people who have taken this with chronic lung issues and asthma, and they've really found a tremendous benefit. And some people some of my clients, their partners have actually taken this without them knowing, and they've said, "Oh wow, like what are you doing that is making you seem to have more energy?" One person in particular noticed their partner could go up and down the stairs without labored breathing, and it happened that they were actually taking cordyceps in particular. So the brand Real Mushrooms, I don't know the brand Real Mushrooms, so I can't speak to that. I haven't seen them before. Oops. Also really interesting for autoimmune patients, especially there's some studies with lupus patients where taking cordyceps before and after meals helped them with various issues, as well as protected the kidney function, because this is one of the best herbs as well for the kidneys and for that anti-aging effect. Really good for anti-tumoral conditions. A lot of studies about cordyceps in that. Again, extract showed no anti-tumoral effect in vitro, meaning when they put this in a petri dish with cancer cells, it didn't really inhibit the tumor. So this indicates that the medicine of cordyceps comes from, it's host mediated. So we take the medicine in and it stimulates our body to do the job of the immune system better. This is a really interesting one too with methotrexate. When cordyceps was taken with methotrexate, it appeared to extend the survival time. I believe this was a mouse study as well. And so it may also be a benefit in prevention of tumor metastasis with cancer chemotherapy. But I thought that was really interesting because methotrexate, it's a cancer drug, a chemotherapy. And when they were taking cordyceps with methotrexate, this study showed that it appeared to extend the survival time, which is to say it probably ameliorated some kind of the negative toxic effects of that chemotherapy. Cardiotonic helps to relax and dilate the bronchial passages in the aorta and improves athletic performance and all that good stuff as well. So it's really, really a good herb. Let's see, a few more questions coming in here. Oh, 4-sigmatic, yeah. It's interesting. Again, the best way to take medicinal mushrooms is going to be the way that you will get them in your body. So 4-sigmatic, I think to that extent is really good. I don't remember their product if they just use the whole cap unextracted or if they actually go through the process to extract the medicine and then make it available in the product. If you take powdered reishi and you just run it through a coffee pot, you're not going to get that much of medicine out of it. And so if 4-sigmatic doesn't use extracted medicinals, then it's probably going to have some benefit, but it's not going to be quite as much. Dogs can have mushrooms. I actually lately have been producing a powdered mushroom blend for pets, for cats and dogs. There are some products you can get online as well, but for some reason they haven't, they cut production of them for some reason. But yes, for animals, they can take mushrooms as well. And I have given mushroom products to clients with animals with autoimmune stuff in particular, with psoriasis and eczema, and it's really, really helpful. As well as a dog, recently a client had a dog that had a tumor removed, and so I'm giving, I sold them some mushroom products as well for their dog. Yeah, Hashimoto's, that's another autoimmune condition. So for autoimmune stuff, I would recommend cordyceps because that study with the lupus patients that it showed an actual beneficial effect for autoimmune conditions, at least in the realm of lupus. Because in general, cordyceps is immune modulating. So, it's going to boost phagocytic activity, which is to say the white blood cells' ability to eat pathogens, white blood cells run through our body and basically digest and eat pathogens. And so cordyceps seems to stimulate that. Seems to restore lymphocyte and IgM, IgC responses in mice that were actually given immune suppressing pharmaceuticals. They were given medicine to suppress their immune system, and it seemed to stimulate, cordyceps seemed to stimulate and restore that function. Another study found normal T cell function was not enhanced, but defective T cells were. So this is a really interesting thing, again, for an autoimmune perspective, is that it's not going to overstimulate your immune system. It's not going to, shoot your T cells or shoot your immune system through the roof, but it is going to help. It seems like it's going to help support the defective T cells and support the aspects of the immune system that have been knocked back or reduced. So I won't say too much more about these mushrooms in general. I want to get to the clinical trials. Chaga, the only thing I'll say about chaga is that you don't want to take chaga if you have kidney issues. Chaga is really popular, so I encourage you to look at it as a medicinal. But if you have kidney disorders, kidney disease of any kind, then I would really be careful about chaga. It has, if I didn't say, the high oxalic acid, which are rough on the kidney. So definitely consult your physician, consult your doctor about that. But it has a great use, a great history of use in Siberian cultures and otherwise. In particular, really good as an antioxidant and for the cognitive benefits as well as the really stellar immune function. And this article by Britt Bunyard is a really good one because chaga is this weird mushroom that people try to harvest, and there's a lot of weird, sort of dark, lumpy things on trees that people will think is chaga. And so he wrote a good article about that if you're interested in harvesting your own. Turkey tail, just to shoot through this again, is a really well-researched medicinal. At one point, Japan had spent 25% of its entire anti-cancer drug budget, production budget on turkey tail and researching that. So it was just a really big push for it in Japan at one point. There's also some clinical trials that included Paul Stamets' mother, who had a stage 4 tumor the size of a grapefruit in her breast. And in taking this along with following through the whole trial, her tumor was removed and put into remission, and she survived for many, many years after that. So some really good clinical trials with turkey tail as well. In particular, it's anti-carcinogenic, and people typically use it for prostate cancer as well. So I've seen a lot of people go towards turkey tail for prostate and cervical and breast cancer in particular. So before we get to the clinical trials, let's see the chat here. So I recommend purchasing them dried. Yeah, dried is good. You know, if you can get them fresh, that's best. But there's not a lot of places that sell fresh, fresh medicinal mushrooms, except for Shiitake is one of the ones you can find, and oyster mushrooms, which we'll talk about oyster in a minute. And yes, I do recommend reishi for Hashimoto's as well. And again, I would have to see the person in particular, but in general, reishi is so helpful as an immune modulator for the immune system that I really recommend it for anybody that has issues in that realm. Best one mushroom for preventative. I think what you're asking, Sarah, is what's the best overall mushroom? And I would say reishi or cordyceps. They have just such a great overall effect on the body, as well as on the mind and spirit. We don't have enough time really to talk about that, but these herbs, especially reishi, are used not only as physical medicine in the Asian apothecary and the Chinese apothecary, but also as spiritual medicine. They're considered to be heart tonics, and they're considered to be really supportive for the spirit. And so for people who need support on that level, they're really great. Matthew Wood, who's the herbalist in Colorado, says one thing about reishi that let's see if I can remember what he said. Taking reishi daily for a long period of time brings you closer to nature in a way that you can't lose, right? And that always makes me smile when I hear that, because I understand what he's talking about. There's this way that reishi is just so beneficial for not only, again, the physical, but also for the spirit and for the heart. It's really, really lovely. Any mushrooms not recommended for autoimmune? There's nothing that's really contraindicated for autoimmune diseases in particular, no. As long as you're not going too far afield, anything that you can get in the store, it's going to be really good. Oh yeah, and about lion's mane. I'll mention lion's mane before we get into the clinical trials here, because lion's mane is another one that you'll see a lot. It's really great for all the issues we've mentioned, including cardiovascular and immune support. But in particular, the Chinese Materia Medica has used lion's mane to help heal gastric ulcers and gastric cancers. In particular, there's a compound in lion's mane that is really specific against H. pylori, which is the bacteria associated with ulcers. So there's this really powerful gut healing capacity of lion's mane. And more recently, lion's mane has gotten a lot of fame for its ability to help remyelinate damaged nerves, essentially. So there's a lot of research and a lot of interest now being done for lion's mane for cognitive and neural disorders. So I recommend looking into that a little bit more too. It's really, really powerful. You know, we used to think that nerves could not regenerate, and with lion's mane and some other substances, we've found that indeed nerves can regenerate to some degree. Look at that. Ooh, there it is. Yeah, lion's mane does taste great. Tastes a little bit like lobster. So you can make some really great crab cakes with lion's mane for all you Maryland folks. I've only been in Maryland for 6 years, so I'm still getting on the crab cake train here. So let me shoot through these clinical trials, and Jen, just go ahead and jump in whenever it makes sense for me to wrap it up here. I'll try to wrap it up a few minutes before the hour. In one trial, Shiitake mushrooms, 5 to 10 grams daily for 4 weeks led to significant immune effects. Natural killer cells increased, as well as a subset of T cells, and both show this increased ability to express activation receptors. A lot of other great things, including serum levels of several cytokines, shifted after 4 weeks of his mushroom consumption. And you may be privy to the cytokine storms that people are talking about with COVID, where suddenly there gets to be this overwhelming level of cytokines and inflammatory responses in the body, and people take an immediate turn downhill when that happens. And so Shiitake seems to have a actual clinical ability to suppress that kind of cytokine surge in the body. So again, just a really great mushroom that you want to take as a daily, something in your food, not only because it's delicious, but also because it's going to protect you at this really deep molecular level. Oh. Additionally, with Shiitake, and this is interesting, I put this in here because again, there's a lot of research, some that shows really powerful effects and some that show, maybe not so. Shiitake extract at 2.5 milligrams daily, and this was with 42 patients in the trial, which is a pretty small trial considering how big trials can get. Participants split up into a couple random groups and taken for 6 weeks. And essentially, supplementing with the Shiitake did not result in changes to cytokine levels, but it did result in an increase in circulating levels of B cells, even at that modest dose. So again, it's a smaller dose of Shiitake. It was taken for 6 weeks, but that study showed that it did not result in changes to the cytokine levels. So again, that's what we do with science. We have a theory, we have an idea, we test it. Other people test the same theory, and you eventually sort of build a picture out of all the results. So interesting to note here that study is part of the picture. Cordyceps shown in this trial to impact cell-mediated immunity. 79 healthy adult men were given ethanol or an alcohol-extracted cordyceps or a placebo for 4 weeks. Cordyceps was safe, well tolerated, no adverse events reported, and also led to a significant increase of natural killers, lymphocytes, IL-2, interferons, and all that compared with the placebo. So again, great general boost for the immune system, safe, well tolerated, no adverse effects, something you can take daily. And if you really want the positive effects of something like cordyceps or these other medicinal mushrooms, you want to follow the protocol of these studies by taking it daily for 1, 2, 3 months. You want to take that dose of that mushroom daily so that those compounds can wash through our digestive system, wash through our body, and have that consistent kind of building effect. Here's one, actually a couple about oyster mushrooms. Let's see, supplementation with a beta-glucan supplement from oyster mushrooms. And beta-glucans are these large, heavy sugars that mushrooms produce, and some other things as well. led to a significant increase in circulating natural killer cells, and additionally reduces the incidence of upper respiratory tract infections. Okay, oyster is one of the best edible mushrooms, in my opinion. It's one of the more available ones in terms of the gourmet mushrooms, and it is just far and away such a great one to eat. So, second study here for oyster, the immune supportive properties. In this study, they say it may have important therapeutic potential for people with acute or chronic viral infections. This study cited, again, a beta-glucan supplement extract, and this was dosed at 1 milliliter per 5 kilograms of body weight. So again, a dose is also dependent on how much the person weighs and what their general state of health is. But this was dosed for 6 months, daily supplementation for 6 months. And another one for 3 months, shown to reduce the incidence of respiratory tract infection in children, okay? And significantly decrease the incidence of flu or flu-like illnesses. So again, safe for children, really great indication that it's going to help protect our bodies from upper respiratory tract viral infections. So that's what we want these days, right? That's what we're looking for. So what this means is that, you know, having a nice stir fry or a soup with shiitake and oyster mushrooms, you know, have some miso soup in the morning with some mushrooms sliced up real thin. Just get these mushrooms in daily. You know, this is really the protection that we want in terms of herbal medicine and in terms of food as medicine. This is what we want as a daily supplement, as a daily regimen. To be able to just give ourselves general health, but also specifically to help protect ourselves from upper respiratory effects, upper respiratory infections, rather. Oh, that's an interesting question. What are the possible long-term side effects for a teenager of taking magic mushrooms one time? Let's see here. I want to answer that question because it's a great one. You know, there's a lot of study these days with Johns Hopkins, for instance, doing a lot of study with psilocybin and magic mushrooms as treatment for intractable depression, treatment for alcoholism, treatment for a host of PTSD and other sort of difficult issues. If you look at the studies, there's one study in particular where Johns Hopkins showed that the positive effects of that patient's experience with medicinal mushrooms, or rather with magic mushrooms, psilocybin, extended for months and even years into the future. And, you know, in terms of the possible negative side effects, sure, you know, they can cause anxiety. They can cause a really difficult, difficult internal mental state sometimes. They can have lasting effects, but in general, that is not the main thing that sticks around. The studies from Johns Hopkins indicate that the long-term side effects for magic mushrooms, they do stick around long-term, but they're positive. They're extremely beneficial in terms of helping people experience a better sense of themselves and a better sense of themselves in the world. And also, magic mushrooms have, you know, essentially zero toxicity. So it's really worth understanding that they are scheduled at the most dangerous class of drug in our society. So I'm in no way recommending people take them or seek them out, because they come with a pretty severe, you know, legal penalties. So they're classed at the most dangerous category, but they are amongst the safest actual category of things to ingest on that list of drugs. So it's an interesting conversation, and perhaps one that we can have a little bit more in depth later. Canned mushrooms. Oh yeah, no, canned mushrooms are great. No effects lost unless, you know, they're years or decades old. And yeah, medicinal mushrooms, you definitely want to take them under supervision of an herbalist or a doctor that is, you know, really hip to the considerations of medicinal mushrooms. In general, they're safe. So there's a lot of people that just go out on their own and get some medicinal mushroom supplements, and that's just fine. But again, you know, if you really want to maximize the benefit of the supplements you take, it's always worth seeing a nutritionist that's herbalist, you know, somebody that's really savvy in terms of understanding who you are and what the best supplement is going to be for you. because there's so many different medicinal mushrooms. You know, how do you choose? And a qualified practitioner can help you do that. But again, they're very safe. So if you are the kind of person that just wants to go out and grab a bottle of reishi or cordyceps and give it a shot, see what it does for you, it's not going to be any harm in doing that. So as we're wrapping up here, oh, that's the oyster mushroom, really beautiful. Maybe we can end on that since I see Dr. Wong popping up here. Yeah, so that's you know, the bulk of the presentation. There's a lot more clinical trials that we can talk about with HPV, you know, clearing long-term viral infections, also with breast cancer and various other things like that. So there's a lot of information out there, and there's a lot of interesting things to really dive into at a deeper level. But hopefully this presentation was useful for you and communicated some of the important aspects of medicinal mushrooms, and it's beneficial.
Thank you so much, Jared. That was awesome. Gonna have to make my own appointment with you.
Yeah, sure.
Discuss. You have a practice called Vital Traditions. That's in, is that in College Park or?
Yeah, it's in College Park. It's in the Berwyn neighborhood of College Park, so kind of tucked
Okay.
off the main drag a little bit.
Yeah. And you have I saw on your website, you have a mushroom farm, or you have some other, can people go by there and take a look, or is that, you know?
I don't do tours right now because it's a really small level, but I do produce medicinal mushrooms, in particular reishi and oyster.
Yeah.
And as I sort of build up a little bit more, we'll continue to produce more products.
And I like what you said about how mushrooms treat the spiritual as well, because we know that individualized care and really knowing the person, knowing who you're dealing with, you know, knowing the meridians too, you know, how people are, you know, have different expressions based on either 5 elements or depending on what traditions you're, you know, have learned. That's definitely going to impact also the way that, you know, an individual person might respond to mushrooms or any sort of organic material.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. So, how do you combine acupuncture with herbs and with mycology?
Yeah, good question. So, you know, in general, I see acupuncture patients, and I don't give herbs to all my patients. But when someone comes in and they have issues that we're working with and treating with acupuncture, sometimes it'll happen that I think, oh, you know what, this herb would really be good for you. And so we'll work out a formula for them, or perhaps they're curious themselves about herbs, and so we'll design some herbal formulas to sort of work together with the acupuncture treatment. So it really is, you know, just pretty organic. People come in mainly for acupuncture, and then as it sort of emerges, it may make sense to take lion's mane, to take shiitake, to take chaga, reishi, whichever one of these, or perhaps a, you know, custom herbal formula with plants as well.
Great. I have a couple other questions, if you don't mind. Dr. Andrew Wall, who I did an integrated fellowship with, he's very interested in mushrooms as well, and he studied mushrooms. You know, been to different places harvesting mushrooms, etc. And he was telling us in the fellowship that white portobello or more common mushrooms, cremini, etc., have carcinogens in them that aren't completely eliminated when cooked, whereas other mushrooms such as shiitake or, you know, etc., would, you know, those potential carcinogens would be eliminated when cooked. Could you just comment on that statement, if you feel like that is?
Absolutely. It's really a worthwhile one to speak about. So white button mushrooms, cremini, and portobello, those are all actually the same species of mushroom. So we can talk about one. And, you know, generally when you get a salad bar, when you get that, you know, you're going to have access to these raw mushrooms. And indeed, they have a protein in them called agarotine, which agarotine is this particular type of protein that for whatever reason, its configuration is carcinogenic to us. There are even some studies, you know, again with the mice studies, they give cancer to mice to then test the medicinal compounds of other things, right? Agarotine is actually one of the things that they will spread topically on the mouse to give it topical.
So we shouldn't be eating raw mushrooms at the salad bar. I guess not many people are going out right now to eat at salad bars, but
I do recommend that people avoid raw mushrooms in general, button mushrooms pointedly, yeah, I do recommend that people cook those.
And if the white mushrooms or cremini, except portobello, if they're cooked, because a lot of times veggie sandwiches, right, use like a portobello mushroom basically. Is that safe to eat? From that perspective.
Absolutely, it is. And it's yeah, because the heat is actually what breaks down and helps to unravel that agarotine protein.
Got
So
it. Got it.
when you
Okay.
cook it fully, it's
Yeah.
done. And also white button mushrooms have anti-tumoral compounds as well, and they have
Already, right. That's right.
yeah, where
Okay.
they're also helping to prevent that level of mutation on the cells. So it's an interesting double-edged sword with button mushrooms.
Another interesting thing I found recently in the last year is that I think at University of Pittsburgh they did studies showing that people that eat more than 2 or more servings of mushrooms per day have a decreased risk of dementia. Again, looking at the brain health, and so I think certainly, is there? It doesn't sound like it's toxic. Where like if you eat mushrooms every day, like that's what I was thinking. I need to do is, is that something you do? Would you eat? Would you recommend eating mushrooms every day, or drinking mushroom tea, or having the tinctures, like you said?
Absolutely, yeah. And again, if you look at any of the studies, especially the ones coming out of Asia, where they have these really rich traditions of knowing how to use these substances,
Yeah.
all of these studies are doing supplementation daily, sometimes multiple times a day,
Yeah.
for months. And that's really what we want to mimic if we want to be able to get the medicine from these herbs, is mimic that sort of daily consumption. So yeah, whether it's tincture, whether it's eating a serving or two of mushrooms a day, taking some capsules, or all of it combined in some thoughtful formula.
I mean, it makes sense, right? Because when we eat organic vegetables, when we eat organic mushrooms, we're really having the messenger RNA from those foods interact with our DNA. So we're eating nature, right? But we are nature too. So we're not doing anything that's contrary to the body. We're doing things that we're already should be used to anyway.
Exactly. And also, if you look at it from a sort of biological evolutionary point of view, mushrooms are really easy to dehydrate and store. And so in winter times, back when we were, less technologized, dried mushrooms were something that we were just eating daily through the winter to be able to get through, because they're so easy to collect and dehydrate and store. And so I think that is something that's really important in terms of why we need to eat them on a day-to-day basis to get this, because our bodies are just adapted. We have this evolutionary adaptation to need these.
So then just a clinical, a more practical question. I think I have a lot of patients, for instance, that like mushrooms, and we recommend a lot of mushrooms here. Love to get more of your expertise on that moving forward as we have more conversations about this. I've had a few people that are just like, mushrooms aren't for me. The taste, they just don't like the taste. So just curious what your advice to them would be.
Yeah, a lot of people are like that. A lot of people, because our society, Western society, American society, is very fungophobic. So we have access to tea mushrooms. What we do have is button mushrooms, and a lot of times not very well cooked or prepared. So
Right.
Great range of experience. So what I tell those people is to cook mushrooms well. A lot of people don't like the slimy kind of texture, and that goes away when you cook them a little bit more thoroughly. Adding
I
some
like that. Yeah, that olive oil garlic combo with the mushrooms. It's really nice.
Yeah, especially with some garlic and some salt until the edges get a little crispy, and then it's
yeah, that's great.
Oh my gosh,
That's amazing. That's an amazing taste. Yes.
I know nobody who's turned those down. Yeah, I recommend that. Or if someone is really wanting to get the mushrooms, but they really just don't like the taste or the flavor, go for the capsules. The capsules are a great way to get the mushroom in, especially.
Yes. I think one more question, and then thank you so much, Jared. This has been amazing. Thank you so much. And Beth was asking one more thing about dried mushroom powder. Is that as effective if consumed in a smoothie? I guess instead of a tea, maybe is what your question is, Beth?
Yeah, generally speaking, and again, everything is nuanced. Let's see if that was her popping up again. Everything is nuanced. A lot of times the dried powders are dried mycelium grown on rice, and that's what's powdered. And so that is very bioavailable. You can take that in a tea, you can take it in a smoothie, you can just sprinkle. I have clients that just like the taste and they sprinkle it over top of their food, over top of their dinner.
Yeah.
So very bioavailable. Then on the other hand, you have something like reishi mushroom. Again, like I said, it's as hard as wood when it's dry. So if you powder that, Sure, you're going to be getting some of the chemicals, you're going to be getting some of the important molecules, but all of those proteins are still so tightly bound that you really still want to be cooking that and extracting that in water for a half an hour. So if you throw reishi powder into a smoothie, you're probably not going to get the same level of activity from it than you will if you properly extract it.
That's
So
where
it's just really
the
dependent.
soups come in. That's where the soups come in. Yeah,
Yeah, that's where the soups come in, the broths, absolutely.
great. Are there any books you recommend to learn more that are accessible to people?
Yeah, sure. Let me see if I have any right on hand. Christopher Hobbs has a great book called Medicinal Mushrooms. It's really excellent. Um, Paul Stamets' Mycelium Running is also just
Mm-hmm.
a great text about anything mushrooms, from medicine to cultivation to using them to clean up the environment. Um,
Yeah,
so those two are great. And also The Fungal Pharmacy by Robert Rogers is really comprehensive about a lot of different types of mushrooms. So that's also a really great one to have on hand.
great. Let me just type it in for people here. Thank you so much, Jared. This has been amazing, and we look forward to talking more about this. And if anyone has any questions for Jared, I think his information is here too. And thank you so much. And we will see you again next week. And EJ, our physician assistant, will be on to talk about integrative primary care, and I'll be talking with her as well. So that'll be great. And there's some interesting things. We're going to talk about some practical tidbits. I think some things about B12 shots, how to truly prevent things, in addition to not only conventional medicine, but also more deeper prevention as well. So we'll see you all next week. And thank you so much to Jared too.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Pleasure.
Thanks.
Talk to you soon.